Hey everyone, we know how hard it can be to keep up with the latest news in Israel, so if you haven't had the time to stay on top of what's what in the Holy Land with ILTV, have no worries. It's time for our new show this week in Israel, where we'll give you the scoop on everything you need to know about the last 7 days right from Tel Aviv. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, here to keep you informed. The IDF has confirmed that last night's airstrikes have damaged or destroyed dozens of Iranian military sites throughout Syria. Though the dust is still settling, this is by far the largest Israeli assault on Iranian targets in the region. Israeli jets took to the sky after as many as 20 Iranian missiles were launched at IDF targets in northern Israel. And at this time, there are no casualties or injuries reported, and we believe the Iron Dome intercepted most of the warheads. The White House has just issued an official statement slamming Iran for its aggression and supporting Israel's right to defend itself. Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman confirmed Israel's counterattack personally. According to Lieberman, the IDF wiped out nearly all of Iran's military sites in Syria.
אנחנו כמובן פגענו בכל התשתיות, לא בכל, אבל כמעט בכל התשתיות האיראניות בסוריה. והם צריכים לזכור את היומרה הזאת, שאם אצלנו יהיה גשם, אז אצלם יהיה מבול. ואני מקווה שאנחנו סיימנו את הפרק הזה וכולם הבינו.
At the same time, however, Army officials warned that Iran is still quite capable of launching further attacks. Sirens broke out across northern Israel last night, sending Israeli citizens to the bomb shelter moments before Iranian missiles left Syrian airspace. Russia was informed of Israel's counterattack before it was carried out, likely in an attempt to calm any further flare-ups between Moscow and its ally Syria. This is a culmination of weeks of tension along Israel's northern border, a situation thrown into further uncertainty following President Trump's decision to withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal. With the fate of that deal still very much up in the air, analysts worry that Trump, bolstered by Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, have now set an unavoidable trajectory to a new regional war. This is the outcome most Israelis are indeed bracing for. Well, as many analysts expected, the impending outcome of U.S. President Donald Trump's withdrawal from Iran has likely sparked a regional arms race. Now it looks like Saudi Arabia is vowing to pursue nuclear capability if Iran is able to. And joining us with more is ILTV's Aaron Pors. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Natasha. And yeah, as you started to say, it's really not that surprising, to be perfectly honest. Saudi Arabia has long talked about how they would match Iran in kind in any military developments that they make. But what really should be kind of a wake-up call as to how serious Saudi Arabia is the fact that they reiterated that fact shortly after Trump pulled out of the JCPOA.
Yeah, well, Saudi Arabia and Iran have been at odds for quite some time. In fact, Saudi Arabia is pretty much the only Gulf or only country in the Gulf Arab states besides Israel to support the collapse of the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. Right. So, do you think that we have a race for, nuclear arms coming?
An arms race? I mean, it was highly expected that an arms race could break out should the deal fail. So, I mean, it would be highly unlikely that they didn't see that coming, at least as a possibility. But that being said, as you just said, Saudi Arabia and Israel was one of the countries to support leaving the deal regardless, long before we actually left the deal. So that could point to a few different ulterior motives potentially. And for Israel, for example, the case might be that, as Netanyahu said, he would rather deal with Iran, nix a bad deal than keep a good one. Nix a bad deal than keep a bad deal. No deal over a bad deal. But he also said that he would rather deal with Iran on the cusp of a nuclear breakout now than in 10 years from now. For Iran, it might be that maybe they wanted to become a nuclear power and this gave them an excuse. Maybe,
Well, what does it mean, if Iran stays in this deal, as they're saying? I mean, that's a plan here for the Iranians. Right. Would the Saudis drop the whole issue?
Theoretically, yeah, I suppose so. But, it's anyone's guess whether or not that will happen. Iran did already agree to continue abiding by the JCPOA should the European and other signatories to the deal continue to uphold their end of the bargain, but that is really difficult to do considering new United States pressures. They would have to rebuff that, so it doesn't seem likely.
All right, well, we will keep a close eye on the situation. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Dr.
Well, in the wake of Trump's decision to unilaterally withdraw from the Iranian nuclear deal, the world stands divided like never before. The U.S. will resume its economic sanctions on Tehran, but the remaining members of the original pact are urging Iran to remain in the deal, hoping to avoid a war that many suspect is now beginning to unfold. ILTV's Brett Allen Smith is here. And Brett, before we get into Europe's plan of action, what is the feeling in Iran?
So actually it's, pretty split. Iran's President Hassan Rouhani says that he plans to meet with European, Russian, and Chinese members of the deal to see if they can try to figure something out. And if that's really going to be the path here, Rouhani's probably hoping that the terms of the JCPOA will actually improve in Iran's favor now that everything's, up in the air. Plus, now he has something Europe and the rest want. They want Iran to stay in the deal because the other scenario that is that everything collapses and Iran simply resumes developing nukes the very next day, which is exactly what the regime has promised to do.
Right. Well, if Rouhani is at least taking meetings first, this sounds like a somewhat diplomatic approach. But on the other hand of the spectrum, we are seeing Iranian leaders who are actually ecstatic that the deal's over because it frees Iran to develop weapons of mass destruction. Iran's Revolutionary Guard says the deal cannot be saved and that Trump's move only proves that America can't be trusted to uphold its end of any bargain.
Right. This is for sure going to fuel more extremism and mistrust against the U.S. And on top of the Guard, members of Iranian parliament just burned an effigy of the American flag during an open hearing. But look, even outside of Iran, Trump just divided the world's powers on a very critical issue that impacts everyone without offering any plan B, I might add. Take China and Russia, for example. The U.S. relations are already pretty stiff on those fronts. So if Trump just damaged or even burned a bridge or two there, that doesn't bode so well for deals that he's got to make down the line. Like Israel. I know Prime Minister Netanyahu is extremely pleased that this is the path that Trump is taking, and Netanyahu is in Russia right now talking with Putin. So the fear is, if Israel finds itself in a conflict, with Iranian proxies in Syria overseen by Russia, did Trump just blow his chance to help Israel negotiate with Putin if and when a situation like that arises?
Well, obviously, it's a huge ripple effect. That's precisely why Europe, China, Russia, and the U.S. are urging everyone to stay committed to the deal despite Trump's pullout. My question here is, can the deal still be saved?
Look, there's a chance, I'd say. The other members of the deal, spearheaded by Macron and May, they're going to try to band together as a unified front. And if in the end Iran is only looking at sanctions from the U.S., my guess is that it could survive that, and it may choose to. That would make Trump's decision yesterday, rather impotent, let's say. But the greater fear here is that Iran now gets to come to that negotiating table with a way, way better bargaining position. And considering that this deal back in 2015 took years to work together and to negotiate to get there, that's obviously not ideal for everyone else at that table that the U.S. now is no longer a part of. So the coming days are going to be very telling.
But we will, of course, be following things closely as they unfold. Thanks for joining us, Brett.
Sure.
Yesterday was the first general election in Lebanon in nearly a decade. Exit polls are now coming in, and for many it looks like their biggest fears have been realized. Hezbollah's political party is expected to come out on top and dominate the new Lebanese parliament for the coming term. ILTV's Brett Allen Smith is here with analysis. And Brett, how should Israel be taking this news?
Well, look, like with everything, I think Israel needs to proceed with caution. But even though this may seem like a huge, shocking turn of events, Lebanon's parliament is still a really big ship to steer, and even Hezbollah's political faction alone isn't enough to steer it completely on its own. And I say that acknowledging that, yes, Hezbollah is sponsored by Iran, and this is a scary proposition, but still, it's a big ship. It's a big operation.
Well, Hezbollah has obviously been a critical part of the Lebanese government for years now. Its own armed wing, which is widely seen as a terrorist organization, nearly outguns Lebanon's own state army. And that's why some Israeli leaders have often said that you can't separate Lebanon from Hezbollah, even in times of war. Given these results, is that now the case?
Well, obviously, with a government where Hezbollah serves as the majority leading party, that's becoming easier and easier to argue. But we have a few things to consider here about this election. So first, voter turnout was low, and not just because there's no foul play suspected, there's no voter intimidation or fraud suspected, but still shockingly lower than expected overall. And especially considering that this was Lebanon's first primary election in almost a decade, that's a pretty big deal. That says a lot. Second, yes, Hezbollah's victory here says something big about the direction that the country is going in general. But here's something else that we did just see. 2 women are expected to land seats in the parliament this coming term as well. And now there have been women in the parliament before now, but for a country that may be becoming more, more radical politically, this is a pretty significant silver lining, if there's any silver lining to see here. Lebanon's government still ranks as one of the lowest in the world for female representation, so that's a big deal.
Yeah, sure, but even given the opposition parties Hezbollah will face in the parliament, are we going to be seeing major changes in Lebanon or even become, more aggressive when it comes to Israel specifically?
Honestly, I would say that even in Lebanon right now, that is generally not the feel. There's no big feeling of there's going to be a big change, a big radical shift. I know that may sound strange given these results, but after all, Hezbollah is pretty clear that it wants to wipe Israel off the map. But look at how politics in Lebanon actually work. Most of the system is still based on inheriting posts, family dynasties, even handing parliament seats and entire elections to sons when the father becomes too old to run again. That's how their system works. So some of this election, regardless of the outcome, feels more symbolic than anything else.
Yeah, well, still, I doubt things will shift to any kind of foreseeable peace with Israel. The head of Lebanon's next government will probably still be very firmly against that.
Agreed, though I will say that, as the arts and the culture continues to develop in Lebanon, just in the people, there is a growing sense that in the fringes of Lebanese society, there may be some people warming up to that idea of a kind of a people's peace, but obviously we'll see, and we're a long ways away.
All right, well, on that note, thank you for the information, Brett.
Of course.
Well, for the 6th weekend in a row, like we said, thousands of Palestinians in Gaza have erupted into violent riots along the security border, clashing with IDF troops. And as we've seen in recent weeks, Palestinians have been using kites to fly in firebombs over the border and burn Israeli fields. And now, for the first time, the army has actually just launched airstrikes against a Hamas military site in the Strip, all in retaliation for these kite attacks. At this time, hundreds of Palestinians are said to have been injured in this latest round of clashes. The IDF, however, has just released some rather telling footage in which supposed injured Gazans can be seen faking their injuries. The video footage also accuses rioters of purposely bringing small children dangerously into the fray. The Hamas-sponsored March of Return protest has been raging for nearly 6 weeks now. The terror group originally claimed these would merely be peaceful sit-ins, but Israel sees it as an obvious cover for terror and has responded to countless attempts by Gazans to either destroy or breach the security barrier and infiltrate Israeli territory. Israel has faced intense criticism for its use of lethal force to contain these clashes, but a new ruling from Israel's High Court has just declared these clashes as an official state of war, meaning the typical laws governing human rights don't apply. At this time, over 40 Palestinians, including 2 teenagers and 2 journalists, have been killed by Israeli bullets. 6 Palestinians were actually just killed in an explosion likely caused by their own explosive devices misfiring. With the protests set to coincide with the opening of the new U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem in less than 10 days, Israel is bracing for what could be a very bloody showdown. With the opening of the new U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem set for next week, Hamas is promising a bloody finale to the weeks-long March of Return protest. Hamas leaders have just delivered a chilling rally cry to hundreds of Gazan youth. They say that when the protests reach their climax next week on May 14th, their leaders will be ready to die for a decisive end to Israel's blockade of the Gaza Strip. ILTV's Brett Allen Smith is here. Now, Brett, the embassy opens in just a few days. How bad are these clashes going to get?
Well, this is the final hour. The entire idea behind the whole March of Return rally, right down to its scheduling, is to parallel that moment that the embassy opens its doors and is open for business. That's going to be a very painful moment for the Palestinians all over the world, because as much as Israelis, feel very validated by Trump's recognition of Jerusalem and, by moving the embassy, this is a big nail in the coffin to the dream of Palestinians that they've been fighting for, for quite some time now. And Hamas is providing the, let's for better lack of a word better say, the more aggressive outlet for that anger. And you can be sure that Hamas wants a big, maybe even bloody finale to those protests.
Well, as you touched upon, the opening of the embassy in general is hugely controversial. That's because most of the world's nations have widely held that the fate of Jerusalem should be left between Israel and the Palestinians to decide for themselves in peace talks. The city is obviously sacred to both parties for religious reasons.
Sure, and reflecting that controversy is the fact that, next week's ceremony is going to be a fairly one-sided showing. The rumor is that European diplomats are actually going to skip the foreign ministry's big event altogether as their own show of protest. Something like, I think 86 ambassadors were invited altogether, but I think only about 30 as of now have formally accepted the invitation. But even though this is going to be mostly Americans and Israelis present, even some of the American embassy team that's based full-time here in Tel Aviv is actually not so thrilled about the move. I'm not going to name any names, but the feeling is actually pretty mixed in the office here, I will say, because they expect that this maybe is just going to spark more bloodshed and unrest in the future.
Well, what about reports that say Hamas is actually seeking a long-term ceasefire deal with Israel?
Right, so those rumors are looking more and more concrete, actually. Nothing's going to stop Hamas from finishing this March of Return rally next week. An unnamed Western country is, though, apparently already brokering some kind of talks on both, the Hamas side and the Israeli side. But Israel is definitely not going to consider, much of anything, even big promises like Hamas is supposedly making, until these weekly clashes are over. And the fact that these talks are happening at all means that Hamas may really be running out of options here.
Either way, next week will be a major week for history,
Sure.
so let's hope it can pass without any further bloodshed.
Sure.
Thanks for the update, Brett.
Of course.
Next week, Prime Minister Netanyahu will cut the ribbon and declare the new U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem open for business. But we won't have to wait long for the next such ceremony, because just 2 days after that, it looks like Guatemala's embassy will officially make the move as well.
El presidente Jimmy Morales estará viajando a Israel el día 14 de mayo para asistir a la inauguración de la nueva embajada que se está trasladando de Tel Aviv a Jerusalén. Esta nueva embajada estará en un campus tecnológico en Jerusalén, ubicado en el tercer nivel, y ya están todos los preparativos listos, desde los escritorios, cada uno de los lugares, hasta la misma bandera de Guatemala que ya está ondeando en este lugar. Se espera reunir con el primer ministro de Israel, Benjamín Netanyahu, también con el presidente de Israel, y también tendrá una reunión con el presidente del Congreso de Israel.
President Morales will open Guatemala's new embassy on May 16th. Guatemala was one of the few countries that openly embraced U.S. President Donald Trump's controversial Jerusalem decision late last year. The country is also heavily reliant on its alliance with both the United States and Israel. Shortly after Trump recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital and declared that he would be moving the U.S. embassy accordingly, Guatemalan leadership quickly followed suit, despite intense international outrage from the rest of the world. Historically, countries have left the delicate issue of Jerusalem between Israel and the Palestinians to discuss in peace talks. Trump's speech is widely seen as a moment that the United States removed itself from its long-serving role as an impartial negotiator to those talks, and possibly the moment any hopes for a two-state solution finally collapsed. Still, Guatemala's declaration was soon followed by Paraguay. Paraguay will be third in line to relocate its embassy to Jerusalem, with a ribbon-cutting ceremony set for later this month. All right, the last stage of the Giro d'Italia cycling race has come to an end here in Israel, and the event is now heading back to Europe to resume the rest of the tour. ILTV's Emmanuel Kadosh is here with the details.
Thanks, Natasha. Yesterday was the third and final stage of the race for Israel, with a 229-kilometer or 142-mile race from the city of Beersheba to Eilat. Italian rider Elia Viviani won 2 stages, one being yesterday's, and then also the stage from Haifa to Tel Aviv on Saturday, finishing in 5 hours, 2 minutes, and 9 seconds.
Well, I mean, I can't believe that it's all coming to an end. Saturday, when I walked out of my house, the whole city was going nuts, cheering the riders on, taking videos, and it was such a special thing to see here in Israel. This definitely wasn't an easy event to plan in this country.
No, not at all. From what I understand, this was the most complicated, expensive, and logistically challenging sporting event Israel is yet to host, and that's according to Sports and Culture Minister Miri Regev. It's been reported that the 3-day event cost around 120 million shekels, or $33 million, and was mainly funded by Sylvan Adams, an amateur cyclist and real estate businessman from Canada who moved to Israel just 2 years ago.
And it's such an honor for Israel because, it's in its 101-year history. The Giro d'Italia has never started outside of Europe. This year, it finally managed to actually happen because of Sylvan Adams, who had the idea of starting the race here in Israel to coincide with the country's 70th birthday.
Right. It's such an unbelievable honor and such great exposure for Israel, of course. I mean, I read somewhere that last year over 840 million people watched some portion of the race on TV, and then this year there are already expected to be 1 billion people watching. And just to give our American viewers a little contrast, the Super Bowl had 114 million viewers. So we're just saying, that's crazy exposure.
It's unreal to hear how many people will be watching and cheering the riders on. But for now, the Giro says goodbye to the Holy Land, and it's making its way back to Italy. Thanks for joining us, Emmanuel.
Thank you.
Now, ILTV's Emmanuel Kadosh is here with this week's Top 5.
Israel has been victorious 3 times so far in the Eurovision Song Contest, and this year we're expecting a 4th. But before we jump the gun, I'm here to give you guys the top 5 Israeli song submissions, including the 3 that won, and 2 of our all-time favorites. So let's get started.
I'm not your toy.
We can't start this list without putting the Israeli song submission for the 2018 Eurovision, Toy by Netta Barzilai. Her song has been #1 on absolutely everyone's list since the music video came out, and her performance at the semifinals this week blew us all away. Her song talking about being a powerful, strong, and confident woman comes at a perfect time, to say the least. I don't want to jinx anything because honestly, we're just so proud of you already. Second on our list may have not taken the prize, but it did become a staple in the Israeli music scene since it first came out. Golden Boy by the young Nadav Gej was the 2015 Israeli song for the Eurovision and was the first Israeli entry with lyrics entirely in English. The song finished in 9th place in the grand finale with 97 points, but either way, he's still our Golden Boy. Third on our list was the winner of the 1998 Eurovision, Dana International, with the song Diva. Now, while Orthodox Jews and other conservative groups were opposed to Dana representing Israel, Diva won the contest with 172 points. Diva also became a hit, reaching #11 in the UK charts, as well as sweeping the charts of countries all over the world. Fourth on our list was the song that was performed here in the Holy Land in Jerusalem, winning the 1979 Eurovision, Hallelujah, by Gadi Atari and Milk and Honey. This was the first time Israel was hosting the Eurovision Song Contest, as well as the first time the contest would take place outside of Europe. And in an effort to remember and show respect to the song, Israeli Culture and Sports Ministry released an updated version to celebrate Israel's 70th birthday. Last on our list, but first to ever win in the contest, was the song Abani Bi by Ishal Cohen. The song, an up-tempo disco number, took the prize for Israel in Paris in 1978 and is best known to be one of the best entries in contest history, not just because of the tune, but also because of the performance itself. Let's hope we can add this year's entry to the list of wins, and that's all for today's Top 5. Back to you.
That's it for this week's Roundup. Tune in next Friday for our next episode of This Week in Israel. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for joining us from Tel Aviv.